Hey everybody, welcome to Workforce Gaming. I am Brad, here with Doug.
Hey.
1000xResist is a very odd game that I don't think it got a ton of attention, but it got enough attention that it got kind of tossed up on my radar of like a lot of people like, this game is insane and is one of the best games this year. And screw Rebirth. Have you played 1000xResist? Like, I've seen like, I saw a bunch of takes like that. So I was curious about this game. And
then you got super into it and were saying the exact same thing. So then I bought it, and we've both finished this one, which is
it doesn't happen often enough.
Yeah, it does not happen that often. Yeah.
But yeah, it was one of those games where the things that they were saying about it not only was good, it's like this weird dystopian sci-fi world. There's like all this like stuff with clones, and like the story is really mysterious and you never quite have a firm grip on it, and it's constantly throwing, and it was just like, that's a good thing, that's a good thing, that's a good thing, that's a good thing. So I finally broke down and bought it, and I do think I like hammered you with text messages for like a week straight of like, oh my god, you should play this so I can tell you things about it. You should play this.
Yeah.
So to jump into what this is, it's, again, we talk about these games enough that we keep using the phrase walking simulator, quote unquote. This is kind of a step past it. There are a little bit more puzzles. There's a little bit more environment, but it is very narrative, like just walk down the path, walk to the place, go talk to the person. A few places open up a little bit more where you can talk to random other people, but it is very much that type of game.
I feel like it's almost more similar to a visual novel that allows you to walk around the environment. Splitting hairs at this point.
I mean, you get the idea. Like, the gameplay is not the focus here. It is a lot of just walking. It's walking and talking. Whatever you want to classify that, it is walking and talking. And so we'll kind of set that aside and leave the gameplay there. But the story of this is pure bonkers insanity. Now, at this point, I just want to say that the less you know, the better.
Yeah.
I very much feel like this is one of those games where there are moments in the first, I think I even texted you like 45 seconds into this, like, I think, because I've been playing Paper Mario, and it's like, the first 45 seconds of 1000xResist are way more interesting than all of Paper Mario.
Yeah, it's funny, in the footage, I've actually like cut like the first like 5 minutes of the game.
Yeah.
So the footage that people are watching is actually like missing the first 5 minutes, because the first 5 minutes is really crazy, really disorienting, and doesn't really slow down, I guess, from there.
So again, we have to spoil some stuff in order to talk about the game and give you the general premise. Yeah. We'll try and be as vague as possible and as close to the beginning as possible, because it does take a lot of hard turns here and there to kind of go, oh nope, that's not actually what the game's about.
Yeah.
The general concept is there is some kind of event that happens, and you're introduced to it through Iris, this teenage girl, and basically she is immune to this event, and that's the general setup. And then where the game really takes place is these 6 clones of Iris are living in this garden a certain number of years later. And it's basically the story of how these clones deal with what's happening, deal with their daily lives, and try and figure out how to manage what's going on. Does that kind of sum it up in a way that doesn't really spoil what it is? It sounds very boring when I just said that, but this game will blow your mind.
Yeah, no, you play as a clone of Iris, and I think it's important to note, like, of the clones, they all worship Iris as this sort of godlike figure called the AllMother. And that none of them have like a lot of contact with her, so they're sort of kind of assuming her intentions. And throughout the game, you're learning Iris's background, her intentions, kind of like where she's at. I think it's like a really interesting godlike character to have, because Iris is not a good person.
They do establish that very early
on, that like this sort of like last savior of humanity is not a great person.
Is mostly just a shitty teenager.
Yep, exactly. And the game is really, really cool, because I like that how it frames the different characters as you go along. Because I actually remember when we were talking, because you finished this like maybe a few days before I did, and I was like, oh, well, this clone who's called the Healer, it's like, she's kind of like a crazy person. You're like, boy, do I have thoughts on Healer. It's like, oh, well, what about this clone who's BB
Fire, BBF, Bang Bang Fire?
BB. Yeah, Fire. And you're like, boy, do I have some thoughts on that one. And the reason I really like this game is because you're introduced to all these characters, and then your thoughts on those characters change so much throughout the game, of like where the characters are start and where they end. And it really does feel like all of the characters, all the clones you meet, Iris especially, the kind of like one human character who's left, I feel like you get to learn a lot about them. And that's the big thing with this game, is just like learning about these characters, learning about their motivations, and then as they start colliding as the plot moves forward, is just really, really cool.
Yeah, and I think with that, the game is told very nonlinear. You are jumping around all the time. You never quite really have a good sense of time with this, and it's never really elaborated on in terms of how Iris is alive through all of this and what's going on with her. There's hints at different things that happen with her. How long the clones last for, we don't know. So there's all this kind of this future tech involved. So you never really get a good sense of time. So the game jumps around a lot. You do these things called communions, where you basically can kind of go back and relive memories of different characters, of Iris, and those then reveal more to our main clone characters in this, the Six Sisters. And from there, you're kind of learning more about it. And then you see time jumps, and we go back in time. It moves around so much that it fills in the pieces. So again, like you said, like, oh, healer's being a little sketchy. It's like, well, hold on a minute. Wait for 2 hours later when something happens, and something happens. And now you'll really have a thought about healer, because now you've seen, okay, here was healer before that moment. Here's what healer has done after that moment. You really get that sense of what's going on.
And the thing I really did like about the game as well, and like I think it does a really good job of knowing when to disorient the the characters, and when not to. Mm-hmm. It definitely gets, especially like near the finale, but there's like some very like sort of like, let's just say like ethereal moments where you're not quite sure what's going on, but that has some like very solid moments of like, this is clearly a place and time.
Yes.
You clearly know these two characters. There's nothing weird going on. It's just like these two characters talking. Mm-hmm. So I feel like sometimes games with like sort of mysterious stories that can sometimes struggle with is like, they just want to be mysterious all the time and have all these mysteries going on all the time. And this game kind of has that, but it just has so many moments that like ground you, that's like, this is happening in this place and time, that like was really helpful moving along, so you're not totally lost all the time, which was like, that was just very, very helpful. And I think one of the best parts of sort of like anchoring those characters is they talk a lot about like Iris's parents.
Yes.
And all the scenes with like Iris's parents were just like really heart-wrenching and heartbreaking and interesting. And there's no clone shenanigans going on with them. So it's just like this nice sort of like, okay, this thing happened in the past. I know this is like kind of within the reality of our time and all that other thing. The one thing I do want to talk about though is the influence of this game, because influences this game is pulling from, because I think that's not totally traditional. For one, it's so I always hate when media, not hate, but like COVID, like
the way that people handle the pandemic is what you're trying to get
like
to.
Nobody, yes, there's like a few ways to do it. There's one where you just say the pandemic one time in the next season and then never mention it again, or two, you're like too heavy-handed with it, or you're just talking about it too much and nobody cares, and like it's just like, shut up guys, we don't talk about it. But this one just uses some of those thoughts on the pandemic in like a really, really interesting, and I was texting Brad, not annoying way.
Because what it does is it doesn't specifically go out of the way to the game itself is not like related to COVID in any way, shape, or form. But the game plays on the fact that now that we've all had this shared experience of that, we witness that kind of concept in a much different way now, because it's not like, oh yeah, there was this pandemic and people had to live inside, and wouldn't that be crazy? Like, yeah, it fucking would be, but we all did that, so we get it now. Like they don't have to like explain it and work through it. It's just like, oh yeah, there was this epidemic, people and it's like, okay, yep, that tracks, because now we have a real world basis to base that on. And it's one of the few things that I've seen that really has used it in that way, where it wasn't kind of like cliche, like, oh yeah, there's another pandemic, everybody go inside and lock your doors 6 feet away now.
So like I think you did a great job. Yeah, exactly what you said. It's like they don't need to explain stuff. There's just not a lot of explanation. Like, there's a pandemic, you kind of get what's going on, and it's neat how they kind of twist this version of their pandemic in really unique ways. The other thing I really like about the game is the tone of the game is, I would say, really unique in video games. It's this sort of like I don't know how you describe that tone. It's not sad necessarily, but it feels so hopeless all the time.
Melancholy,
really like melancholy and hopeless. Yes. And it's just really interesting as like the story goes on, as like sort of these kind of like, not just like world ending, but these world potentially changing events are going on. It was just like, things get worse before they get better, and sometimes they just get worse and then they don't stop getting worse. And I just really, really liked that kind of tone.
Yeah.
Without it being overly violent and gross and stuff.
It's very much that just this is where we are. And it doesn't, we're not looking at it as it sucks. We're not looking at it as it's better. It's just, this is the world now. This is where we are. Yeah. Like, it might seem like it sucks, but we have some good things. Some things are good. Some things we miss. Some things are, and it just always, and it never tries to, like you said, it never tries to like push that like, oh, it's hopeless. Like, this is horrible. Everything sucks. But it's also like, oh, but look at how rosy and sunny it is in the future. It's like, this is the state of being. And this is the state of being that our characters are in the world that they're in. And they're going to try, but frankly, this is it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think kind of on that as well, it's dealing a lot of like the sins of the past in like a bunch of different interesting ways of kind of like you said, like, this is the world we got, guys. And then kind of learning the history of what got you there. It's like, okay, yeah, that's great that we now know this history, but there's a lot of times like, okay, now we all know this history, but we're stuck here. So what do we do next? And I really liked how it dealt with that sort of, especially like a lot of the stuff of, sins of the past sort of thing, whether that's Iris herself, whether that's Iris' parents passing that down, Iris' grandmother passing that down, the clones passing it down to each other. It's a lot of this like cool, interesting generational trauma stuff that they deal with as the game moves along. That's like all really, really cool.
It's one of those games where I struggled to think about anything else, and that doesn't come along very often. There are very few games where I can sit here and play. Like, I played this over, I think it was like 8 hours maybe. I think I played it over maybe 4 or 5 nights. And it was just constantly in my brain of like, oh, I wonder if that's what that was. Ooh, I bet it constantly had me thinking. There are scenes in it that feel like no other game could pull off and really make them as impactful. There are scenes in this that you see in other games that this game just does head and shoulders above other games. I started this off by saying like one of the things that drew me to this were people were like, no, this might be the best game that comes out this year. And I am in full agreement with those people at this point. Like, I could, when we do our game of the year, I could very easily see myself going, all right, number 1, 1000xResist. Number 2, that shitty Rebirth game. Like, doesn't hold a candle to this weird little, like, almost family drama you get at some points in this game. And it's just, it's such a unique thing that I think more people need to give it a shot. Like, if you have any interest in kind of that future, the dealing with the pandemic, family drama, like, just it does those things better than almost any media in general, not even games that I've seen, and it blew me away.
Yeah, and it does a lot of that with very little. Like, we don't really talk about the graphics or the characters or anything like that, but it's like, it's a lot of just sort of like posed characters as they're talking, which I guess is more similar to like a visual novel. But it is interesting again, where it's like, there's not a lot of assets in the game, but they're remixing them and it's exactly that. And and like repurposing them in different ways, or sending you to the same place multiple times. But now it's actually, because the story is there, it like actually makes sense why you're going back there multiple times. It is really interesting though. Just like, a game can just excel in one. If a game can excel just like in one thing really, really, really well, then you can make a really great game out of that. This game, like, just the story, just like, it's just a very good video game story. It's just a very good story. And then, we talked about gameplay and stuff. It's just, look at the gameplay. Just, you can look at our video. If you're like, not for me, not for you. Like, I'm not gonna try to encourage you to say
what you see is what you get. What you see is what you get. There's no hidden like anything in here. What you see is what you get. I will be remiss if I said this, because I do love this game. Probably my favorite game. The design of that main hub world place, there were like 2 or 3 times where it's like, I think I spent 20 minutes trying to remember where something was, and I just could not find it. There were the few like 5 to 10 moments of irritation where just like, I just put a marker. Give me a Ubisoft marker here and tell me where to go, because that's what I need right now, because I swear I've been everywhere on the second level and the first level, and there's that weird diagonal path that cuts across. I love this game. It's amazing. But the only moments I had of like, were that. And again, small team, all that other stuff. And like you said, you do one thing insanely well, you cover up a lot. And that's what this game does.
That main area is not super great, but that's okay.
But again,
the rest of the game's cool. You won't remember that. You might remember that when you finish the game. But
it literally came up at this point because I was like, okay, is there anything negative? Okay. 1 negative, 1,000 positives.
little crunchy on Switch, but the PC version's really good. I did play a little bit of the PC version to get footage for this. Switch version's a little crunchy. Just a little crunchy.
It's no. It's if you've played a non-first party Switch game, it is a non-first party Switch game on Switch. That's what it is. They all
sure.
You know what you're getting there. I don't think that
those should not deter you from playing 1000xResist.
It is amazing. We will discuss more at our Game of the Year Awards in early January. But for now, we are Workforce Gaming. Leave a comment below. Subscribe to our channel. There's a link to support us on Coffee as well. We'll see you later.
Bye.